Hi, Valeria. Thank you so much for welcoming us today. For the audience, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Valeria. I was born in Chile. I have dedicated my life to be a social entrepreneur, working on social issues and develop solutions that can transform markets. And I can share more about that later, but that's the essence.
Yes.
I have to say, though, that I started as an engineer, and I thought that it was about building things. And later I realized that that didn't give me the sense of purpose that I think is essential for social entrepreneurs. And that's how I started exploring.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So what is your definition of social entrepreneurship?
A social entrepreneur is somebody who cares deeply about a problem and that it doesn't rest until it finds a solution or multiple solutions that will change the very essence of what are the causes of that problem. And I make a distinction between social entrepreneurs who lead social enterprises and entrepreneurs who are social entrepreneurs from the perspective of being architects of new market systems, that they are basically looking at eradicating the cost of the problem. And that distinction, it's quite important because it's a difference between having a few thousand beneficiaries and having hundreds of thousands or millions of people that benefit from what you do. And the term system change entrepreneur is quite fundamental there because it's the interpretation of social entrepreneurship where system change, changing the architecture of systems, the dynamics of system in a way that it can benefit significant numbers of people.
So what kind of global challenges are we talking about? What are the challenges, the focuses of social entrepreneurs?
For example, when you look at in the order of 500 million people that depend on farming, small-scale farming to survive. They are usually not connected to the market. They don't necessarily have the resources from financing, from technology, and so on. How do you transform the dynamic of that system so that small farmers can thrive? They can be successful. They can have lives that are fulfilling, as opposed to living in conditions that unfortunately is the majority of small farmers in the world, where they have significant difficulties from selling their product to having the ability to add value to it and sell, for example, commercialized processed products. Fortunately, there are many social entrepreneurs now around the world tackling that problem from different perspectives. And they are also, there is a new awareness among corporations that are buyers of those small farmers, and that market dynamics is starting to change in very exciting ways. The very essence, for example, of taking advantage that the conversion of small farmers into organic farmers is very easy, unlike it's relatively easy compared to medium and large scale. And that offered a unique competitive positioning for them in markets. And there are social entrepreneurs working on that aspect, and that is resulting in millions of families having very different lives. Another example is, it's in almost every industry, and but other examples are related to any basic need. Housing, for example, requires low-income housing requires solutions that are significantly affordable, that connect to not just to the needs of low-income families, but also what they can afford in the terms that they can afford. And if you're interested in learning more, that's an aspect of. I could share more examples about that.
Yeah. But That's great. Please tell us more about global challenges that social entrepreneurs can tackle. So you mentioned small-scale farming. Like, what are the other things that social entrepreneurs can focus on, and the major problems that the world needs to address right now? Yeah. What would you say?
I would say the most fundamental problem, particularly for your generation. Mm-hmm. I mean, for my generation, the fundamental problem was abject poverty in the world. Yeah. And a level of inequality that it was what it led me to become a social entrepreneur. But for your generation, I would say a fundamental problem is climate change and environment. And how do you actually reverse the dynamics of markets big time, both from the perspective of local communities that are living in conditions that they are basically being affected by the way global markets operate negatively, and it's only going to get worse. Now, how do you change that at the scale that it required? It's going to be the issue that it's going to make the difference between, in 50 years from now, this planet existing or not. And you need to ignite a kind of agency at every level, at the level of consumers, of pausing and asking themselves how their pattern of consumptions are affecting this. At the level of local communities, from the perspective of self-organizing to solve a problem, like the example of this energy that you recently interviewed. This energy team is tackling sanitation in a way that it's visionary, and it offered alternative solutions that have been co-developed with communities. And are those kind of solutions that have embedded the kind of where the hardcore innovation is as important as the human innovation from a perspective of how the community organizes itself. And social entrepreneurs know about that. And almost every important problem that we're facing today requires not a gadget to plug in and solve it, but it requires communities to organize. Collaboration. Exactly.
Yes, that's obviously a good one. So you spend a lot of time at Ashoka. You also spend a lot of time at Endeavor, and for the audience, Ashoka is the biggest network of social entrepreneurs in the world. What were your biggest learnings? What were your biggest observations that you'd like to share with us today?
I started my career working on appropriate technology and focusing on rural development from an international development standpoint with an NGO. And I knew that something was missing, and that was the first time that I started asking myself about entrepreneurship and the power of innovation in a way that it could be market-based. And I got it. That's how I was connected first with the founders of Endeavor. And I worked for a year and a half with Endeavor, piloting the first Endeavor operation in Chile. And this was important to me because it was the first introduction in emerging markets of venture capital. And I was learning with the founding team of Endeavor as we got involved in how do you actually create the conditions in Chile and Argentina to have an innovation ecosystem there. So very exciting times, very exciting examples. But I also learned the limitations of that. I was coming from international development, and in international development, the central question was how do you address poverty? And yes, prosperity and enterprises create jobs and create wealth, but they don't necessarily solve the fundamental problems of that create poverty in the first place.
So you think we should focus more on that?
Yes, and that's why I joined Ashoka.
Okay.
Because it was a way of bringing together both worlds. So what I learned at Ashoka, it was captured in the initiative that I founded at Ashoka, full economic citizenship. And we focus on the question of what would it take for a small farmer, for an slum dweller in any part of the world, to have the housing that they need, to have the kind of business, the conditions to develop thriving businesses. And for that, you need a different kind of how-tos. And those are the how-tos of system changers, system change entrepreneurs. That, like I said before, they are different. They have some intersection with social enterprises, but they are different from the perspective of looking at entire systems, asking the question, stepping back and asking the question of where would the leverage points of intervention lead to millions of people benefiting from it and changing the market conditions. And that's what Ashoka Fellows do. And some of them do it incredibly successful, and they have set up an entire new ways of looking at problems. One of my, if it would be helpful, I could give you an example.
Please, that was my next question, actually.
Yeah.
Can you please tell us about one or two examples of a company that is having an impact? Yeah,
for example, an Ashoka fellow in Turkey, Tulin is her name, and she was, I just recently, 10, 15 years ago, she had recently graduated from the business school. Her focus was on marketing. And she decided to find ways to help small producer cooperatives in Turkey. And she started going one cooperative at a time, and very quickly she realized that she could help them to access markets, but that it was going to take her decades to do it at scale. So what she did was to build a partnership with Vodafone that has become a pioneering
in telecoms.
It was the first telecom partnership where an NGO and a telecom got together, both of them for core business reasons. Tulin was interested in improving the access to markets for hundreds of thousands, at the end ended up being more than 1.2 million farmers in Turkey. Vodafone was interested in developing the rural markets for telecommunication. And together they built an offering that it exists until today, that it has replicated to 7 countries, and that it has set a whole new standard on how small producer co-ops work to enable market access to their members. Another example in the climate change space, it started in Canada, and it has a global impact. Nicole Rycroft, it's an Ashoka fellow who asked herself the question of how could, she loved nature, so she wanted to figure out a way that the forest, particularly native forest, wasn't destroyed. And how do you reduce the kind of damage that in the first stage, she asked herself the question of how does she help the publishing companies to use recycled paper, or to use paper that it could be, that it comes from renewable kind of plantations, not from native forest. And she did that successfully by influencing the buyers of paper in all the publishing industry in Canada. And once she did that for 8 or 9 years, she asked herself the question of what next? And what next? It led to, in a matter of not 8 years, but in a matter of 3 years, what she has done is to mobilize fashion companies, more than 120 of them, to embrace new supply chains that are not, in which we don't usually pay attention to the fact that clothing uses natural fibers that come from the forest, and that is basically a contribution of the destruction of the forest. So how do you actually ensure that that the fashion industry is enabling that the planet becomes sustainable as opposed to depleted in a way that we all consumers will be contributing to. So just summarizing on the case of Nicole, what she has done is to work with large corporations to help them understand what is happening in their supply chain and how they can reverse that.
Absolutely.
And she has created an index that it's also motivating consumers to select the products and the companies that will abide by those principles.
And I think you raise a really important point. It's not just about social entrepreneurs that can, with really innovative ways, completely transform the industry. I think it also needs to come from big players, and I think that practices from big players need to change. So I think that's why we need to engage dialogue with big companies that have, for example, oil companies. We need to engage dialogue with them so we can encourage them to change and not just focus on entrepreneurs that are doing a good thing, but maybe foster collaboration between entrepreneurs, between big players, between consumers. So one way to do that is through education. And that's my point. What do you think about education when it comes to social entrepreneurship? How can we educate more people about this concept, and what do you think can be efficient so more people are aware of this concept, and so we can activate it more?
I recently completed a research on that around the question of what is the worldview of system change entrepreneurs. How do they think, and what kind of mindsets lead them to think not on very narrow value chains, but actually entire systems that include multiple value chains that interact, to create industries that either are contributing to solve a system change problem, a problem that needs a system change, or that are creating the problem in the first place. And one of the things that we found is that kind of mindset, the most basic thing is that it has to do with empathy, that it has to do with a sense of purpose. And so part of the question is, how do you trigger very early on in the life of somebody, how do you connect them to that sense of purpose?
Exactly.
And it's not a sense of purpose. There should be 8 billion sense of purposes.
Absolutely.
In the sense that each one of us is going to manifest it with our own voice. And the other aspect, it has to do later in life, when we're thinking business, when we are thinking entrepreneurship, there is a difference between the way entrepreneurship is taught as part of a process of optimizing a value chain and building a competitive business model that creates all what the good things that we know that it creates. Then the other question is why there are a few people that step back, like Tulin and Nicole, and they say, how can I transform this entire industry? And what we end up finding in interviewing Ashoka Fellows, leading Ashoka Fellows that have reflected on this issue, is that it is fundamental, once you create that sense of, once you cultivate that empathy, once you create that sense of purpose and connect with it, then it becomes a question of an immersive experience that in which you will literally dive deep, almost embodying the problem that you want to solve. You need to actually see it in a way that where entrepreneurship becomes not a noun, but it's a verb, It's an actual unfolding, entrepreneuring in a way that you will create an action learning agenda in which you will always be iterating the solutions to your problems. But that's not the way that most of us grew up,
Yeah.
So it requires education at every level, in elementary school, in high school, and definitely in business schools, to design those kind of immersive experiences that will lead to finding new solutions for sustainable food models, finding new solutions for climate change.
And be profitable at the same time.
Exactly.
I think this is what social entrepreneurship tells us. It's a very simple, please stop me if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, social entrepreneurship, it's a really basic idea. It's this idea that you can have an impact, a positive impact at a social and or environmental level, and at the same time, be profitable. So most of the time, we think that, to have an impact, it has to go through philanthropic means, donations, charity. But social entrepreneurship is the proof that you can actually make money out of doing good. And I think this is a very powerful idea. And so my question is, what is your message to youth? People that just graduate from school, that don't really know what they want to do with their life, their professional career, how their professional career will look like. What is their advice to them so they can, find their passion, find out what most passionate about, and at the same time maybe have an impact?
The first part of entrepreneurship, which is it has to do with finding the problems that you care about.
Yeah.
And finding them is not an act of like.
You can't be passive. You need to be active.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's not something that somebody can tell you. You actually have to explore.
Absolutely, and be curious. I think curiosity has a
very good
huge role to play.
Yes. And the other aspect, it has to do with the fact that between nonprofit and fully commercially profitable, there is an array of business models. Many of them hybrid business models. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because the moment that you move to systemic problems, some aspects of the solution are going to be fully commercial. In fact, they should in order to
This is how the system works. This is how the system works.
However, when you look at examples like Nicole, for example, Nicole Rycroft has chosen for very good reasons to operate as a nonprofit. With multiple with a revenue model that has multiple sources of income. But point being, right there you have a nonprofit that is transforming a multi-billion-dollar industry. And those examples are rarely seen from that perspective.
Absolutely.
In the case of Tulin in Turkey, for example, Tulin, when I asked her at the end of the interview, I said, "Oh my God, Tulin, we haven't talked about your business model. We have been talking about the small farmers and the large vision and so on, and the partnership with Vodafone, but are you a nonprofit or a for-profit?" And she said, "Well, I couldn't be a non-profit. At the beginning, I ended up operating as a non-profit because it was very hard in Turkey to start a value proposition like mine the other way. Mm-hmm. So bottom line is that entrepreneurs shouldn't be constrained by entrepreneurs that want to change the world. Mm-hmm. They should stay with the focus
focus that is quite narrowed, so
and recognize that the business model will evolve, mm-hmm. and it will surprise them. I mean, sometimes when you are peeling that onion, you end mm-hmm. up finding opportunities that on the surface you may have say this thing will never be commercially feasible. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, companies would have done it. The reality is that down the road, you, like you said, if you are fundamentally curious and you engage others into that curiosity and that commitment mm-hmm. of finding a solution, mm-hmm. You will be able to transform market systems to a degree that it's hard to imagine when you are in the early stages. And another aspect of social entrepreneurs that I think is very important to mm-hmm. to make it clear, another aspect that is very important to make highly visible because it's central to entrepreneurship is that social entrepreneurs not only build partnerships, they build partnerships in a way that they end up leveraging others mm-hmm. throughout to solve the problem. For example, when they go to a local community, mm-hmm. the local community may be very poor, and they but if they help them ignite the kind of self-agency mm-hmm. That would enable the community,
empowering each and every one of them exactly. to also be part of it, be part of the will, be part of the change. The change is multiplied. Exactly. I think that's what you mentioned.
Exactly. There is an anecdote speaking about education and youth, and a Ashoka fellow whose name escapes me right now in Brazil. He taught me of an immersive experience that he had designed for his sociology class. And his immersive experience, it was basically to take students, he was teaching, I believe, community development. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you actually teach it? And the first week of the class, he would take the students to a slum. And the students will remain there for a week, and every day mm-hmm. they would have an assignment. Mm-hmm. And the assignment, it had to do, for example, the first day, it was to find beauty, something that represents beauty.
That's wonderful.
The next day, it was something that represents innovation and the agency of the community.
And there's plenty, I think there's plenty of innovation in Islam because you have to do with the resources that you have. You have to deal with what's there. So you have no choice but to be creative. I think that's also what you're mm-hmm. saying. And that is.
And it's almost like fantastic. Entrepreneurs connect the dots, They connect the dots through the partnerships, through the way they communicate mm-hmm. with the community, or like Ashoka would say, they enable change makers.
Yeah.
Throughout.
Thank you so much for your insights. It was a pleasure to be welcomed today. Do you have any thoughts, any last comments for the audience that you'd like to share right now?
Just that, social entrepreneurship is the kind of community that you build as you are doing it. It can it will transform your life So do it, stay focused on what the purpose is, and explore it, and basically have fun throughout.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was very nice. Thank you.